On the 31st of July 1995, at a small hair salon in the town of Roebuck, South Carolina, an emergency call came through to the 911 dispatch line. A woman named Diane, her voice trembling with panic, reported that she had heard strange noises coming from inside the darkened salon, and then witnessed a man suddenly jump through a window and run into the night. Only minutes later, police arrived at the scene. But what they found in the back room of the salon was a horrifying discovery. The body of Dana Satterfield, a 27-year-old mother, and the owner of the hair salon, strangled with her own belt and hanging beside the water heater. Just hours earlier, Dana had still been smiling and waving at an acquaintance through the glass window. She could never have known that it would be the final moment she was seen by another person. The money inside the salon was left untouched. This was clearly not a typical robbery. Every piece of evidence at the scene pointed in one direction. This was a deeply personal, brutal, and carefully planned crime. At the time, investigators believed the person responsible would soon be identified. But no one could have imagined that it would take an entire decade and a completely unexpected coincidence before the truth finally came to light. Who was the killer? Why did he target Dana? And what caused the case that appeared destined to fade away to suddenly be reopened after 10 years of silence? Join me as we uncover every detail of the case that haunted a small town for more than a decade. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next true crime stories. Dana Satterfield was born on the 16th of November 1967 in Spartanburg, South Carolina, into a warm and religious family. Those who knew her described Dana as a gentle and kind-hearted woman who was always willing to help anyone who needed her. After graduating from high school, Dana trained as a hairdresser and quickly became passionate about the profession. She married Mike shortly after finishing school, and the couple had 2 children together, a daughter and a son. After years of saving money, Dana finally achieved her lifelong dream, opening a small hair salon in Roebuck, a town located just outside her hometown of Spartanburg. At the same time, not far from where Dana lived, there was a teenage boy named Jonathan Vick. At the time, Jonathan was only 17 years old and lived with his mother, a woman who frequently visited hair salons in the area, including Dana's salon. In a small town where almost everyone knew each other, it was completely normal for Jonathan's family to know Dana. Roebuck in the mid-1990s was a peaceful community, where small businesses like Dana's salon were a familiar part of everyday life for local residents. No one in that small town could have imagined that, not long afterward, these 2 people who appeared to have nothing connecting them would become linked forever in one of the most shocking cases in the region's history. In the summer of 1995, Dana turned 27 years old. The small salon she had worked so hard to build had now become an important part of the Roebuck community, a place where local women came not only to get their hair done, but also to talk and share everyday stories. But behind the image of a woman who was always smiling and welcoming her customers was a life that was far from easy. Not long before that fateful summer, Dana's marriage to Mike had begun to fall apart. The two decided to separate, although they had not officially filed for divorce. Dana moved out and began managing life on her own, balancing the responsibility of running her salon while caring for her 2 young children, her 8-year-old daughter and her 6-year-old son. What made the situation more complicated was that, despite no longer living under the same roof, Dana and Mike still maintained a respectful relationship. Both quietly hoped they might be able to repair their marriage for the sake of their children's future. Mike would occasionally stop by the salon to fix small things, including the water heater that he had personally installed. To those around her, Dana's life at the time reflected the familiar image of a single mother trying to carry everything on her shoulders: her work, her children, and a marriage that was close to breaking apart but had not completely been abandoned. No one, not even Dana herself, could have imagined that what seemed like a temporary difficult period in her marriage would become the final chapter of her life. Because only a short time later, on a late July evening, everything would change forever. The 31st of July 1995 began like any other ordinary day. Dana arrived at the salon early in the morning, welcoming customers, cutting hair, and chatting with people with no indication of what was about to happen. At around 6:30 p.m., Diane, a familiar woman in the area who regularly sold cleaning products door to door, stopped by the salon to sell some items to Dana. The two shared a brief conversation, just like their usual encounters in the past. There was nothing unusual about the interaction. About an hour later, Dana's final appointments of the day had finished. The salon gradually became quiet, and Dana began her familiar evening routine, cleaning up and organizing the space before closing. At around 8:10 p.m., Diane passed by the salon again on her way home. The lights inside were still on. Through the glass window, she saw Dana carefully cleaning. The two looked at each other and waved goodbye, a simple gesture, no different from the countless times two people who knew each other through work had greeted one another. Neither of them could have known that this would be the last time Dana Satterfield was seen alive. Diane continued on her way, unaware that only 20 minutes later, when she returned along the same road, everything behind that glass window would have completely changed. 20 minutes. That was the brief window between the final wave goodbye and what happened next. At around 8:30 p.m., when Diane returned along that familiar road, the scene in front of her had completely changed. The lights inside the salon were off something unusual, because only minutes earlier, Dana had still been cleaning beneath the bright lights. From outside, Diane began hearing strange sounds coming from inside, sudden, unclear noises that caused her to stop. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed through the night. Moments later, the figure of a man burst through the salon window, landed on the ground, and ran off into the darkness. According to the reconstruction later made by investigators, that short period of time witnessed a violent sequence of events. The perpetrator approached Dana while she was alone inside the salon and made unwanted advances toward her. When Dana rejected him, he immediately locked the front door and turned off all the lights inside the salon, cutting off any chance for the victim to call for help or escape. Dana was attacked with such force that she lost consciousness. She was then dragged into the back room where the familiar water heater was located. There, the attacker assaulted her before using her own belt to end her life, securing the other end of the belt around the water heater. The entire incident happened in a terrifyingly short period of time, the only window that night, when Dana was alone inside the salon. But the story did not end there. What Diane did not know was that she was about to come face to face with the person who had just committed the crime. Without owning a mobile phone, something completely normal in the mid-1990s, Diane had only one option: run to the nearest store and call 911. She rushed inside, her heart racing, and hurriedly explained to the store employee what she had just witnessed. But before Diane had even managed to calm herself, something that sent a chill down her spine happened. The very man she had just seen jumping through the salon window also walked into that same store. He looked directly at Diane, a brief glance, but one that she would never forget. Without saying a single word, the man turned around, walked away, and disappeared into the night. Immediately after that moment, Diane called the emergency line and reported everything she had seen to police. The strange noises, the unusual darkness inside the salon, the image of the man jumping through the window, and the encounter that followed. A police officer who was patrolling nearby was immediately dispatched to the scene. At first, it was treated as a possible ordinary break-in. No one in law enforcement could have anticipated the seriousness of what was waiting behind the salon door. When he entered the building, the officer used his flashlight to search every corner. The front area showed nothing unusual. But as he moved deeper into the back room, what appeared before him immediately changed the entire nature of the investigation. An emergency report was issued moments later. Investigators and forensic teams were quickly sent to the scene. Immediately after authorities secured the scene, the forensic team began a meticulous examination of the evidence. Dana's body was found hanging, with one end of a belt tightly wrapped around her neck and the other end tied to the water heater, causing her body to be slightly lifted from the floor. The victim's clothing was partially torn. Multiple scratches and bruises were found across her body, signs of a violent struggle before her death. The first thing that drew investigators' attention was the condition of the front area of the salon. The cash inside the drawer and valuable items remained untouched, with no signs of the place being searched or anything being taken. This immediately ruled out the possibility that the crime was a planned robbery. Every piece of evidence at the scene, from the method used to the location of the body, indicated a highly personal act, involving a level of aggression far beyond what would have been necessary to overpower the victim. Crime scene technicians collected fingerprints from multiple locations, with particular attention focused on the surface of the water heater, an area the perpetrator would almost certainly have touched while securing the belt. Several days later, the official autopsy report was released. The results confirmed that the cause of death was asphyxiation caused by strangulation. Dana's body showed multiple injuries consistent with being struck repeatedly before she lost the ability to resist. Forensic evidence also confirmed that the victim had been sexually assaulted before her death. From Dana's body, forensic investigators recovered biological samples believed to have come from the perpetrator, evidence that would later play a decisive role throughout the investigation, although it would take many years before it could reveal its full value. With these initial findings, the official investigation was launched. Based on Diane's account, police created a profile of the suspect, a young white male, approximately 1.75 meters tall, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans. The sketch was quickly distributed throughout the town, but no one recognized the face. The investigation initially appeared to have a possible breakthrough when a fingerprint found on the water heater was identified as belonging to Mike Dana's husband. However, he had a strong alibi. He was at home looking after their 2 children at the time of the crime, a fact confirmed by the children themselves, and he passed a polygraph examination without any signs of deception. Mike was quickly eliminated as a suspect. Another fingerprint, containing Dana's blood, was discovered at the scene, almost certainly belonging to the attacker. But when investigators checked it against available records, it did not match anyone in the existing database. The challenges became even greater because, at the time, the FBI's national DNA database system had not yet been established. This meant police could not automatically compare the DNA sample collected from the scene. Instead, they had to collect samples from individual suspects and compare them manually. A small ray of hope appeared when a witness named Ken reported seeing a strange man standing near a white and blue Ford Bronco close to the scene at around 8:40 p.m., providing the first possible clue about the suspect's vehicle. Several months later, a tip from inside prison led investigators to focus heavily on Russell Quinn, an inmate serving time for a sexual offense, whose method of offending showed several notable similarities. But once again, DNA testing brought disappointment. There was no match. The investigation fell into a dead end for the next 10 long years. For an entire decade, every major investigative effort and every technical lead ended in failure. Yet the final breakthrough came from a completely unexpected coincidence. 10 years after the crime, Ashley Dana's daughter, who was now 18 years old, visited a repair shop for a routine oil change. While she was waiting, a mechanic at the shop noticed her. He was stunned by the resemblance between her face and Dana's, the woman who had been murdered a decade earlier. When he realized Ashley was the victim's daughter, the mechanic Michael was overcome with regret. The reason was that Michael had once made an anonymous call to police shortly after the murder, reporting his close friend Jonathan Vick. However, because there was not enough legal evidence at the time and the identity of the caller remained hidden, the information was never fully pursued. This time, Michael decided to reveal who he was. He officially went to police and provided a full statement about everything Jonathan had told him on the night of the murder, from his intention to meet Dana, the disturbing advances he had made toward her, to the threats he had made against Michael's life if he ever revealed the truth. With a formal statement from an identified witness, a judge approved a warrant allowing police to collect a DNA sample from Jonathan, who was then living in Greenville, around half an hour's drive from the crime scene, with a wife and a young daughter. The DNA results removed all doubt. Jonathan's DNA was a complete match to the semen sample recovered from Dana's body 10 years earlier. Jonathan Vick was arrested shortly afterward. The moment Jonathan was escorted from his residence, a crowd of media cameras was already waiting to capture the image of the man who had finally been arrested after a decade of avoiding justice. When confronted with a barrage of questions, he gave only a brief statement: "I love my wife and daughter. That's all that matters." A sentence that appeared to shift attention toward his family rather than the serious allegations waiting ahead. Once inside the interrogation room, Jonathan's attitude remained unchanged. He repeatedly denied any involvement in Dana's death, even claiming that he had no connection to the victim at all, a statement that directly contradicted Michael's testimony and stood in stark opposition to the DNA evidence sitting in front of investigators. Throughout the questioning, detectives repeatedly presented details from Michael's statement, along with the forensic results, but Jonathan continued to maintain his denial. Every attempt to obtain further information from him reached a dead end. His refusal to accept responsibility made investigators realize that bringing Jonathan before a jury would require more than a confession. They needed a case so strong that any denial would become meaningless. And that was exactly what they began building from that moment onward. During the interrogation process, prosecutors and investigators began reconstructing Jonathan's entire history, hoping to uncover any additional details that could strengthen the case against him. What they discovered sent a chill through the investigative team. In 2002, 3 years before his arrest, Jonathan had been engaged to a woman named Heather Sellers, but the engagement quickly fell apart. Just 2 weeks after the relationship ended, Heather disappeared under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind countless unanswered questions. Her vehicle was later found submerged in a river while her body was never recovered. Heather's family had previously stated that her relationship with Jonathan had been troubled, and that she had complained several times about being treated poorly. At the time, Jonathan was considered the primary suspect in Heather's disappearance, but police never had enough evidence to charge him. At the same time, another unexpected source came forward. A former cellmate who had shared a prison cell with Jonathan contacted investigators. According to this person, Jonathan had once revealed that if he could go back in time and relive a single day of his life, he would choose the day he walked into Dana's salon. The cellmate also revealed another important detail. Jonathan had admitted that he intentionally parked his vehicle away from the salon at another nearby business, to avoid anyone noticing his car close to the crime scene. As for escaping through the window instead of leaving through the front door, Jonathan reportedly explained that he had been overwhelmed by panic at the time. The scattered pieces of information from a decade earlier were now beginning to come together. Michael's testimony, the DNA results, and now an indirect confession from Jonathan himself through a third-party witness. The prosecution's case was becoming increasingly strong, making further denials almost impossible to maintain. With all of this evidence in their possession, prosecutors entered the courtroom with confidence. In November 2006, approximately 1 year after Jonathan's arrest, the trial officially began. Throughout the proceedings, Jonathan maintained his claim of innocence. But this time, before the jury stood an entire chain of evidence that had been built over many months: the complete DNA match, Michael's official statement with his identity revealed, and the account from the former cellmate who had heard Jonathan's own words. After deliberations, the jury reached a unanimous verdict. Jonathan Vick was guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Under the law, Jonathan would be eligible to apply for parole as early as 2035. However, the possibility of his early release was considered extremely unlikely, especially after he later attacked a prison officer while serving his sentence, resulting in an additional 3 years being added to his punishment. When the sentence was read, Jonathan broke down in tears inside the courtroom. He insisted that the real killer was still out there and claimed that justice had not truly been served. But behind those statements, one family had spent 10 years waiting for the truth and finally received the answer they had been searching for. For 10 long years, Dana's 2 children grew up without their mother's presence, carrying a question that had never been answered. Every time they saw a Ford Bronco on the road, they would quickly tell their father a fragile hope they had carried throughout their childhood, waiting for the day the truth would finally be revealed. But even when justice finally arrived, Dana was forever absent from the most important milestones in her children's lives: their graduations, their conversations at the end of the day, or simply a hug whenever they needed their mother. It was a loss that no amount of time or any sentence could ever fully repair. Dana Satterfield's story serves as a reminder that justice can sometimes take a very long time, but it is never truly too late as long as there is someone willing to speak the truth. It was the courage of a witness, someone who had remained silent out of fear for an entire decade, that ultimately brought answers to a family that had nearly lost hope. It is also a powerful lesson for all of us. Sometimes, a single honest voice, even one that comes years too late, can be enough to change an entire life.